So I'm Julie Voce. I'm Head of Digital Education at City St George's University of London, and I'm here representing UCISA's Digital Education Group. I'm joined by Richard and Adam, who are sat here at the front. They will introduce themselves properly when they come up to speak. So just a little bit about UCISA, if you haven't heard of them. They are a member-led professional body. They're focused on sort of IT, but they do have a range of groups. So digital education is one of them, digital capabilities, and then some more IT-focused things around like security, project change management, and women in technology. So a whole range of things. UCISA runs a range of events and conferences that we contribute to, and they run regular surveys of sector use of IT, including digital education. So that's what we're going to talk to you about today. So this data that we're presenting today is based on the UCISA 2024 Digital Education Survey. We've been surveying the sector for well over 20 years now. It started off as a VLE survey back in 2001 and expanded as the use of technologies expand. All the survey reports are available online if you do want to have a look. We've also teamed up with the Digital Capabilities Group, who run some surveys around digital capabilities in the sector. So the 2024 survey was the first opportunity to combine these two areas. We saw that there was a convergence of some of the areas that we were looking at, so things around digital capabilities, but also accessibility and how that impacts digital education. So we've combined it into a new survey, and we survey UK higher education. So the survey took place in spring 2024, so sort of almost 2 years ago now, and we had 58 responses, so probably about a third of the sector contributed to this. So the data we're talking about is based on some focus groups we've been doing more recently. So last month, we met with a range of heads of e-learning, people in that sort of head of e-learning role, representing universities from across all 4 nations of the UK, and representing a range of different institutions, so sort of small scale, large scale, as well as some who deliver fully online there. And for RIDE, we're going to be incorporating a focus on online and distance learners. We have got a Padlet, so if you want to join us and share your thoughts as we go along, we are using this as part of data collection, so anything you shared may be used in publications or dissemination related to the research. But do share your ideas. We've got a link to the 2024 survey on that Padlet as well. So yeah, think about practice in your own institution, any similarities and differences, and any useful resources from your own. Yes. I'm going to hand over to Adam.
Hi everyone, Adam Pearce, Craik, University of Hull here. So I want to talk to you about the focus group that we did on the theme of culture and institutional drivers. So for panellists, one of the questions that we asked most pertinent to this audience today, which post-pandemic initiatives stood the test of time? Out of the 4 people in the focus group, there was an interesting even split in what they wanted to talk about. So we had Coventry and Reading University. They wanted to talk about after the pandemic, returning to the face-to-face on-campus paradigm, back to normality, as it were, for bringing in the lessons learned and a culture of teaching staff embracing the good bits of technology to make more technology-enhanced face-to-face delivery. The other 2 institutions, Birkbeck and Edinburgh, they wanted to talk about this hybrid high-flex space. So Birkbeck, for example, they've invested heavily since the pandemic in infrastructure to deliver high-flex, whole provision on the way, if not fully there. And Edinburgh had been working before the pandemic, continued to go beyond design and delivering their fusion pedagogy, which is focused on postgraduate modules where students can choose whether or not to experience the module in an online or in a face-to-face format, but they work as that shared cohort. So 4 in this focus group, and interestingly, half of them were talking about hybrid and high flex. Let's take it back to the 2024 survey where we have 58 respondents there, and we asked questions about hybrid and high flex there. So question 3.1, does your institution offer hybrid or high flex? Well, the biggest response there at 41% was yes, but pockets of practice at a more individual module level. And what I've explained with Birkbeck and Edinburgh, I would position their responses very much at the 3% end, at the extensive end of things. The other question that we asked in 2024 was about the use of technology and the degree of flexibility that was being offered. So if we look at where flexibility is being offered beyond that first row of 41%, it's not. 36% responded that they were offering hybrid as defined in the survey. Students experience both online and face-to-face, but it's by design. It's not that they choose which environment. Whereas there's 9% responses, student choice over whether they're physically there, the choice of whether they're synchronously or asynchronously participating. That again very much aligns to the Beck and Reading responses. But it leads me to wonder, is this just a pure coincidence that out of a focus group of a random draw of 4, that we ended up with the 3% and the 9%? Or could it be, speculatively, a sign that there's more now 2 years later? I can't answer that question, but I did wonder how I might start to investigate it further, which is this scoping exercise. You see in front of you 16 institutions, higher education, UK higher education institution. So the exercise is key terms of hybrid, high flex, multimodal flexibility, is looking at the institutional websites and seeing where there is reference made. So I've split these into rows. If you look at the top row, joining Beck and Edinburgh, I've put City St George and Manchester Metropolitan University. These two institutions I found are clearly advertising programmes of study at postgraduate level, one's law, one's business, that advertises flexibility. Students decide whether to attend online or face-to-face, but it's all one program. The middle row, the slightly larger row, these are institutions where there isn't a provision that I could find being advertised, but there is clear evidence of pilots and studies, active studies going into the viability of hybrid, high-flex delivery. Some of those have concluded, some of those with recommendations, some of those are ongoing. So maybe some of these gravitate up. And then the final row, these are where I found reference to hybrid and high flex, no evidence of provision, but the nature of the reference is in pedagogical advice or quality assurance advice, how to design for this paradigm effectively. Now that could be a hangover from COVID times, that could be old legacy information, or it could be the groundwork for moving on to the next row, potentially. Now, this is an ongoing exercise and certainly isn't definitive, but in this theme and for you, this audience, I'd invite you to reflect on a couple of questions for the paddler or for us afterwards. And one is, are you one of these and have I got you pegged right based on what you advertise online? Because maybe you're doing stuff in the background. Are you not here and I haven't got to you yet? In which case, do tell me, because it can save me a job. But then the third thing, it's more of the provocation, I suppose, is this our direction of travel? If we're at Ride 2040, have our two worlds of online and face-to-face paradigms converged into high flex? Have we got there? Have we found synergy? Are we employing AI in a positive way to help us with the technological infrastructure, with the AI agentic tutoring? I don't know, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one. But speaking of AI, that's one of the other themes. Over to Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Walker. I'm Associate Director of Digital Education at the University of York. Did someone mention AI? I think it's quite topical, isn't it? If you were listening to the news this morning, there was the Higher Education Policy Institute just published their latest report where it said 95% of students now use AI for everything in their studies. 94% confirm they use it for assessment. So clearly it is a high priority now. And going back 2 years, which seems an awful long time when we're talking about AI, this sort of came up as the leading technology challenge facing UK institutions. And it was top of the initiatives that institutions were planning to address. And specifically, the sort of things that came up in the survey were around sort of dealing with AI in terms of the AI capabilities within their centrally supported tools, but also training and policy and curriculum development. All of these were areas where universities were going to prioritise. So what we did with the focus group, which we ran last month, was to really sort of drill into that and see what institutions have been doing. So the focus group that I sort of oversaw was with Chester, Brunel, Edinburgh and Ulster universities, so quite a spread across the UK. And what we found out is that, unsurprisingly, progress has been quite slow. There's a lack of institutional ownership in terms of a particular leader within an institution that actually is spearheading sort of AI development. What we're seeing a lot of is the sort of growth in special interest groups, working groups, which are trying to sort of work out institutional policy and guidance. And one of the sort of the key urgent sort of areas has been around assessment briefs and this sort of traffic light system of what's acceptable in terms of AI use in summative activities has been sort of a key priority. So we're seeing sort of emergent policy there beyond the sort of the general sort of principles around ethical and sustainable use of AI. Another sort of dimension has been training, and I think the starting point has been very sort of basic launch of generative AI training awareness for staff and students. And in Chester's case, they've actually moved to make staff training mandatory. That's one of only a sort of few universities that I'm aware of that actually have pegged it as mandatory a mandatory requirement. And in some cases, it's a bit like going back 20 years from my experience with sort of the early days of VLE implementation, in that there's a lot of sort of piloting going on, innovation funds to look in more detail at what AI means for different disciplines. And finally, some universities with the wherewithal are actually sort of building their own sort of large language models or chatbots, so actually sort of developing their own technical infrastructure. So that's very much true of Edinburgh University and also Brunel. Other universities like Chester are actually sort of going for commercial investments, such as Teachermatic, making that a technology available to all staff to support content creation, assessment, and other sort of features of their work. So the other sort of key question we asked those institutions, the focus group, is how do you see this playing out in the future? And I think one of the things is that they said was the training we're offering now could soon be out of date. And this is frightening. You know, we were talking about a very short time horizon of 2030, and agentic AI, the emergence of autonomous sort of AI applications, is suggesting that staff need to sort of upskill very, very quickly and become sort of conversant with the capabilities which soon will be mainstreamed. And I don't know if any of you sort of followed the news with the release, very short sort of term release of Einstein AI, this sort of application which can supposedly do everything for a student. If you give your login details, it will submit assessments, it will answer discussions, etc., etc. But I mean, that shows at least the potential of where we're going. But so agentic AI and getting staff fully sort of conversant with that is one of the sort of the key challenges. And what this will mean in terms of the relationship between AI and instructors. Will it make AI more human? Will it enable more personalised learning pathways? We shall see. The other sort of the key debate was around whether we should get into partnership with big tech or should we create sort of our own walled gardens and our own safe spaces. And protect our digital sort of sovereignty as a result. So lots to think about. We'd be very interested to hear where you are in your institution, but I'll hand over now to Julie.
So I had the last focus group, which ties in quite nicely with AI around some digital literacies and inclusivity. So the 2024 data showed that there were a range of digital poverty measures across the institution. So the top three were things like laptop loans, dedicated space on campus, software hubs, all available to support students. Institutions provide a range of accessibility guidance, so thinking about the inclusivity. So, 95% provide information on how to create accessible documents, less so on the captioning, but still 85% are providing guidance on captioning. So quite a lot of information out there. But one of the things we explored in the focus group is how is this actually being applied? Are staff paying attention to it? And then there was a very strong provision of digital capabilities training and online resources when it came to staff, but for students, it was much less varied in terms of the support. And a lot of that comes from where it's delivered in the institution. So in terms of the focus group, we discussed sort of some aspects around digital poverty. and found that actually a lot of the laptop loan schemes, although they're provided by 90% of institutions, they're not fully utilised. They're often limited to home students. And what about your distance learners? Are they provided with any of these tools? No. So this is one of the challenges around providing laptops. But also we talked about, okay, if you're not providing them, what things about the hardware requirements. And some institutions are providing that, but again, it's not always followed. Some of the STEM disciplines require a higher level of spec of computer, and maybe that's not well communicated to students. In terms of inclusion measures, people think about, well, providing study spaces and specialist PCs, in-person training, but how do you make that same space and inclusion measures available to your distance learners? So just thinking about what spaces they've got. And then when we talked, because we had the OU in our group, distance learners, exams and some of the bandwidth hardware issues, these are some of the things they're challenging with. And it comes back to that, what guidance and support are you giving students as they're joining the institution around hardware? When it comes to accessibility, we saw there's a range of guidance available, but we need to think about how we're getting staff to embed that. So we talked about, mandatory accessibility practice for staff. And my focus group, we thought it would last about half an hour. We went on for about 45 minutes and I had to stop them when we got to the point of, should we have mandatory training for these things? There are things that we can do to support that. So the Open University have an accessibility guide for every module, and that's great, but their design process, they have learning designers, they can produce a lot of this. Obviously, if you're working with staff who are producing this themselves, how can we support them to put in place those accessibility guides? But also, Avaris, we've talked about having a minimum ally score. So ally is a tool that people use to help check the accessibility of their VLE. So having a minimum score helps to drive that good practice. And it ties in with work people have done around baseline and minimum expectations for VLEs. But we know sometimes that's a bit of a tick box exercise. And then around digital capabilities, because they were heads of e-learning, they focus more on sort of the support that they provide. So digital education teams primarily are staff facing, and that student digital capability sits elsewhere, but that may vary between a library or an academic digital skills team or even IT. So it's how can we bring a lot of that together? And I think there was a feeling that there is a lot of support for students online, but are they aware of that? And you can have sort of asynchronous support, which helps your distance learners, but a lot of the time students need that synchronous live support. So how are we supporting distance learners with that? And then thinking about embedding digital capabilities, that's what we would prefer. But how do we do that in practice? It's very much reliant on a motivated academic who knows about that. So how can we support staff with frameworks? And again, it comes back to that minimum expectations baseline. So the suggestion from the group was to make these pre-induction modules mandatory. So, digital skills, upskilling, but also thinking about that live support. So the next steps for us, all the case study recordings will be published, so you can go and enjoy them yourself. Then we'll be looking at publishing the findings from the survey and the focus group. And we are looking at the next iteration of the digital education survey as well. So do follow up with us, but we've got questions and we'll have a look through the Padlet. So I saw there was a comment from Leeds who are doing some high flex. So that's good to hear, but take questions now.